Go live.
We are going live. All right, guys. Welcome to the Orange and Brown Report, our OBR Weekly show. This is April 20th, 2021, and Fred Greetham and I are here to talk Cleveland Browns football. Lane Atkins is trying to make his way in. He is currently fighting with Spectrum Internet. Spectrum Internet is winning. But we'll see how that develops as things go on. But we're ready to talk Cleveland Browns football for the next hour or so. We've got some news. We've got some questions. But most importantly, we've got you, hopefully, in the chat room, hanging out and joining us. We will prioritize your questions and comments if you are live with us during the show tonight on YouTube. And we certainly hope you are. We've already got couple dozen people hanging out with us, and that number will only increase as the hour goes on. Fred, how are you doing today, sir?
Fabulous. Ready to go.
Good to hear.
Week from the draft, a week from, I guess, 2 days, a week and 2 days, and we'll be seeing finally what happens. And kind of different. Yeah. You know, usually we're like, Browns are in the top 10 for sure. And many times in the top 5. Now they're at 26, and it's like, boy, that's a dartboard, you know. Like, there's going to be a lot of players available, but who knows at this point, you know, what they're going to do.
You know, the funny thing is, the only thing I can compare it to is 2008 when Phil Savage traded away all of our picks, and we only had a 4th-round pick. But even then, we knew who they were going to take. We knew they liked Bo Bell, you know. And this year they're in the 1st round, and who knows? There are so many different possibilities for who the Browns might take. Hey, I want to let everybody know, give you a forewarning that on draft night, Thursday the 29th, and then the next day on Friday, the OBR will be live via this format throughout the draft. And it's our plan to have pretty much every member of the OBR jumping in and out of live video coverage as the draft goes on. We will talk about the picks. We will talk about how horrible everyone's mock draft is. You'll get the sort of normal weirdness and tomfoolery all evening long. And no subscription is required for this. You know, show up in our YouTube page, and the miracle will happen. So please look forward to that. I hope that we see you on draft night and day 2 as well. So, Fred, you want to talk about some news since the last time we've been here? You ready?
Oh, yeah.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Well, believe it or not, last time we were talking, Jadeveon Clowney was flying into Cleveland, and we didn't know if he was going to be signed or not. And we talked a lot about Jadeveon that night, his impact, the ripple effects on the team. But he wasn't signed, and it was exactly 6 days ago that the Browns finally inked the defensive lineman of their dreams. And so let's just talk briefly about Clowney before we move on. Obviously, a player who this week talked to the media. He said his trouble in Tennessee was number 1, scheme, and number 2, knee injuries. Not necessarily everyone took well to that down in Tennessee. But do you think that Clowney's in a good position, Fred, to revive his career up here in Cleveland?
Well, I think he is. I don't like to see him, you know, when he said that the other day, you know, I was talking with him in the group, and, you know, I think he was under Mike Vrabel down with the Texans, and I think it was the same system. But with that being said, if he's ever got anything to prove, this is it. I mean, you get after last year thinking he was going to get the big time deal, he ends up signing a 1-year contract for $13 million, which is no chump change. But then this year, you know, he ends up getting $8 million 1 year with a chance to get up to 10. I think if he's any type of a competitor, you know, that he says he is, he's going to want to put a big season together so he can get that longer term contract either here or somewhere else. So I think it is a good situation. I mean, I thought it was better when Sheldon Richardson was still going to be here.
Right.
But, as far as I talked to Kevin Stefanski and I asked him today about Clowney, if he could play inside. And it was interesting because he said, yeah, he's versatile to play him inside and outside. We think he can do both. So that could have had a little bit come into play. And in this way, you got Clowney for a little more than half of what you were paying Richardson. And if you could get Richardson back at a discount, you could in effect got Clowney for next to nothing. So, that's interesting there. But I think opposite Myles Garrett, Garrett's going to get the attention, double team. And so this is his chance to shine. I said it all last year. I thought Olivier Vernon should have a monster year, opposite Garrett. And he really didn't. He had the 9 sacks, but you didn't really hear. They were kind of quiet. It was like, I always call it the Edwin Encarnacion, hit the grand slam when you're down 12-0 in
right.
the ninth inning. It does you no good, but it looks great on your box score, and Vernon had the 3 sacks in the one game when Garrett wasn't playing, which was strange. But all that said, this is Clowney's chance. He's not going to be the featured guy on the edge rush. His chance to really, not only rush the passer, but make a big statement in the run game and revitalize his career. And at 28, that really is something that could be a nice piece for the Browns, going forward. If they recognize early and extend him, then you have a bookend. A lot of people thought it would be that draft choice or something, but I like the experienced player coming in. And maybe with McKinley, if he's what the Browns think they are, they can play him outside and Clowney even play inside.
Exactly right. They can move people all around. They've got a ton of options there. They've got Malik Jackson who can play inside and can play outside a little bit. And, of course, if Richardson does come back, it just increases the number of permutations of defensive linemen they can run out there. How do you think Takk McKinley feels about this? He just signed with the Browns, and all of a sudden here comes Jadeveon Clowney. Do you think he looks on this as an opportunity, or does he he have a little bit of contract signer's regret, do you think?
I don't think so. I don't. Obviously, he didn't have offers much more than what he got with the Browns, a 1-year prove-it deal for like $4 million, kind of the half of what Clowney got. I think he recognizes Clowney's a bigger name than he is. And I think he realizes that if he goes out and puts up the numbers, he's going to get his money and he's going to get his contract either here or elsewhere. So, yeah, I don't think McKinley, he has to look at it. I know they don't look at it this way, but to me, he's just replacing Adrian Claiborne.
Right.
You're replacing Claiborne and Vernon with a 25 and a 28-year-old as opposed to, a 30-year-old coming off an Achilles and a 32, 33-year-old. So I think they upgraded at least in youngness and freshness, and I think even in ability. So, with that said, no, I think McKinley, if he's a competitor, will come in here and say, I'm gonna beat out Clowney, and that'd be good for the Browns all the way around, because we saw it way too often, injuries, and then they're done. And Garrett, something's come up with him, and you don't want to, you're gonna have a drop off, but you don't want to have, the third string guy, Joe Jackson, playing that much.
Right.
And so that's where the same thing, they're creating depth at these positions. That's where I'm a little curious about the defensive tackle, because they were thin anyway. And to me, that went right to the top of the list as far as thinness.
Now, we've already got a question from Brandon. We will get to it as soon as we're done talking about a little bit about the news here. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in. We'd love to get them, and we prioritize them. I've come here as always with a bunch of questions from the forums, but we will prioritize anything that comes in via the chat. So let's talk about Sheldon Richardson. They axed him on Friday afternoon. They saved themselves about $13 million against the salary cap. And I guess the question, if you want to save cap money, why this particular move and why make it right now?
Well, that's exactly what I spelled out in, a little plug. I did my pre-draft 5 steps to put the Browns, in the position to compete for the Super Bowl. And I had laid out before free agency 5 things, and they were all on defense. Number 1 was edge rusher. And I commend them. Takkarist McKinley and Jadeveon Clowney weren't the guys that I had envisioned, but I'm happy with those 2. Second I had was cornerback, and they got Troy Hill. They still need to address that. Third I had safety. John Johnson was a home run. But fourth I had interior defensive lineman. And I thought they were thin already by letting Larry Ogunjobi walk and then let Vincent Taylor walk. They did have Andrew Billings coming back, and they also had Malik Jackson. So I felt that's a slight upgrade to go with Richardson. Other than those 3, the fourth one they had was Jordan Elliott. So they only had 4 defensive linemen. And one was probably Sheldon Richardson, in my opinion, was the 3rd best defensive player last year.
Right.
Behind Garrett and Ward. So, yeah, exactly. Very curious to me why you would cut him right now. Last year, if you remember, Olivier Vernon had a $15 million contract. Everybody said he's got to be gone. They kept him. They waited through the draft, and then they restructured him and gave him $11 million guaranteed to save $4 million.
Right.
Richardson was at $13 million, not guaranteed. I don't understand why you wouldn't have waited till after the draft, and either if he doesn't take the guaranteed less, then you cut him. But I don't know the timing. And obviously they have a reason for their move, and we don't know all the details going on. But I don't understand. By my calculations, they had enough money to pay the draft class with $3 or $4 million to spare, even if they wanted to add a cornerback. But now they got $20 million. They got 7. They're like 7th now. They love to have a ton of money in the cap at all times, And today, Stefanski was asked about that, and his answer was, I'm hoping there's a scenario we can bring Richardson back. But ask Andrew Berry about it. We're going to talk to him Friday. And so I don't expect him to answer anything either. But I don't know why they made that move right now. That is the worst move, at least in my opinion, this offseason, or really the only real negative move.
Right. The thinking on it seems to break down to 2 camps. One camp says, I don't like it. The other camp says, well, I don't like it either, but I can understand it, from the salary cap perspective. I guess one theory I've had that I haven't heard is that you would wait until about now. If you want to sign him back, you wait until about now when everybody's used up most of their salary cap. You know what I mean? And there isn't a lot of people willing to throw tons of money at him. Maybe he comes back at a reduced salary at that point. Seems like kind of hardball, but it might be one of the reasons they waited till now.
We don't know if they talked to him and he said no. I mean, I remember seeing the white hat that he tweeted or something a week or so ago, and everybody was speculating that, they're going to cut him because it was like he had a blank hat, meaning he didn't have a team. And so I can look back now and think, the Browns talked to his agent about restructuring or told him what was going, and that was his cryptic, I'm without a team. I don't know. But if he turned down that and said, let's just see, okay, yeah, I could buy that. But I don't know why you wouldn't have then said, what can we do creatively? We want you and so forth to keep him here. Because as well as I know, there's teams like the Ravens that lost some guys and other ones that might be doing whatever they can to add him.
Right. I know the Cowboys, have been mentioned as one team that might have an interest in him. But again, I don't know how much room they have against the cap. And as soon as the move was made, we were saying, gee, wouldn't it be nice to have him back? Because there weren't performance issues with him. And, basically that's a, duh move, that you sign somebody like that back at a cheaper price if he's willing to return. What do you think the odds are of that actually happening, though?
Well, they didn't close the door, and but when somebody's a free agent, anything can happen. And I'd have to think maybe they got a really good indication in talking with him, and he said, yeah, I understand. I want to. That was the first time he'd ever been to the playoffs in his career, and I know that he was very excited about that. And I don't know if the teams that have the money that are playoff bound or have the chance to do that. That's the backstory we don't know. I mean, I can't tell you what he's thinking or what his options are, but all I know is you see a lot of these Steelers that they let go. They seem to be wandering back to Pittsburgh because they didn't get whatever, and then they come back. And hopefully that would be the case. Sometimes there's guys spite that when they let them go, they don't come back even if that's more money than where they get offered elsewhere. That's just the human pride factor. So I don't know when Richardson looks at this and, what the Browns cutoff is, if they said, yeah, we'll take you back at $6 million or $5 million, or you go get an offer and see if we can match it. I don't know the backstory on that, but we'll know probably soon enough. But it just, to me, is they must not have felt like they couldn't live without him, because like you said, you could even waited until after the draft, because teams are preoccupied right now with all that, and they would spend up their allotted money in the draft pick. So
Right.
Well, I don't
excuse me, Fred. Larry pointed out in the chat room that the Bengals are another team that might have an interest in bringing in Richardson. So we're just going to have to wait and see. I have not heard anything of him taking visits to other teams or anything like that at this point. So a whole lot of nothing happening on that front so far. Third news item of the day, and that is goodbye voluntary workouts. NFLPA President J.C. Tretter has a side gig here in Cleveland as the starting center of the Browns. He's been pushing for virtual workouts all the way up to training camp. Most coaches, of course, are not enthusiastic about that. And the NFL seems to be talking about the potential for mandatory workouts going on as planned. I know that Stefanski was asked that a little bit about that today, Fred. What did he have to say about it?
Oh, he was diplomatic, and he said he respects JC's opinion. As a coach, they want, obviously, this is what they do year round. So they're sitting in the office, just talking, looking at film all day. I think they'd rather have their hands on players doing stuff. But I think, they're using, like many things, not getting political in this world, COVID has become, the big thing. These players are all, we're worried about that. I don't know how worried they are about that. I think that for veterans, they, like having 6 months off, and they can look it on the computer, be at the beach and get back to the beach, and do their workouts. And who wouldn't want that? Get paid the same, whether you're, in Berea, Ohio, or you're in Malibu or wherever you are. But I think this is going to change things forever. They don't want these off season, and particularly the veterans that are calling a lot of these shots with the NFLPA. If I have somebody that's a threat to my job coming in as a rookie or a free agent, they're not getting the opportunity to show what they can do. When we saw last year, undrafted free agents and guys really had hardly any chance to make the team because they didn't get to show what they could do in preseason games. They really just had a limited practices, and you weren't allowed to really hit. And so, yeah, I think that Treader, he said all last year that he liked the way things went last year, and he cited the injury, the low, and all those numbers.
Right.
And it's hard to argue with some of that stuff, but obviously when you're not playing the preseason, that's going to eliminate, a lot of injuries, because you got a lot of younger guys trying to be eager and make a play, and they hurt a veteran or something.
Right. We've certainly had that happen in past Browns training camps with quarterbacks getting hit when they shouldn't have gotten hit. And Treader does bring up a great point about the number of injuries decreasing, particularly the number of concussions, which is an injury that the NFL is trying to get rid of. Be very interesting to see how this develops as both sides withdraw to their respective corners. The NFL recently created this sort of phased approach that buys them until May 17th to do something that's non-virtual. So we'll see if anything happens here in the next couple of weeks. And the last news item we're going to talk about today is Kevin Stefanski speaking to the media this afternoon. He said a couple of things. He said that the injured players are coming back and progressing well, which, I don't know what his motivation would be for saying that. If he's trying to paint a pretty picture or whatever, he may just be telling us what the actual truth is from his perspective, that all the players are progressing well. He is respectful of the decision to boycott voluntary in-person workouts. But of course, he would prefer to coach them in person, which is exactly what you would expect him to say. In response to your question, Fred, he said Clowney has the versatility to play inside and outside in the line. And he also said the Browns staff will be inside the team's facility for next week's draft, but will be in different rooms. So apparently they're Zooming their way through the draft. But as typical with Stefanski, nothing, at least that I read, that seemed especially newsworthy. He's very good at getting his way through these press conferences without saying anything that becomes a blaring headline.
Well, he singled out Greedy Williams and went out of his way to mention that he is coming back. He's working extremely hard, and he's still got a ways to go. But I don't know if that was a little bit, because that was unsolicited. The question was about OBJ, and he says, "Oh, he's doing really well. He's." But then the key sentence was, he conveniently said, "I don't right off remember all their timetables when they're expected to be back," is what everybody wants to know. Are they going to be ready for training camp? Particularly Grant Delpit, because he's kind of said recently, I think to the team site, that he was a few months away. Well, all of a sudden, You start looking at the calendar, few months could be training camp or August. But he went out of his way on Williams, and I think that he was just, because a lot of doubters about that nerve issue, but also could be a little smoke, in my opinion, that, we don't need to worry about getting a cornerback because we have Greedy Williams coming back. And so for those of you in the draft people, whether he comes back or not, that they need more depth there. I mean, they got Troy Hill, but they lost two guys. Terrence Mitchell's most notable. Kevin Johnson played a lot as well. But you don't want, if you're down to your 6th, 7th cornerback, you'd much rather have, a much better player than, say, a Robert Jackson in the playoffs. So a guy had never played corner in the NFL until, those last two Steeler games. So all that being said, he didn't give a lot. He's become, I said it early on a podcast we did, he reminds me of Bill Belichick when he came in as a rookie. And the only difference is Stefanski tells you nothing with a smile on his face.
Right.
Belichick was really, up until him, most coaches did answer your questions. They didn't give out extra information, but they used to say, yeah, he broke his foot. They didn't say, well, he's sore. Belichick was the first one. We used to laugh. You'd see a bone sticking out of the guy, and he would say, yeah, he's got a sore leg. It's like, why can't you tell us what is wrong with these guys? But they're all like that nowadays. And I mean, it's April. I don't know what kind of competitive advantage it is to say Delpit won't be around till July 20th or
Right.
won't be around till August 15th. But that's what they choose to do across the board.
And yeah, Stefanski's very good at it. He's a modern coach who, like you said, says nothing with a smile. And I just know when these media times with Stefanski come out that not to expect any headlines, coming out of them, because he's very good at burying anything that could cause a banner headline on the usual suspects. All right. Well, with that out of the way, let's get into some of the questions that we have both from the forums and in the chat room. Some good questions in the chat room. I want to go back to Brandon's question asked early on. And he says, with outside corner still being our biggest need, I would like to trade a third or fourth round pick in OBJ for Stephon Gilmore. OBJ's cap number in 2021 is $15.7 million. Gilmore's is $16.2 million. What are your thoughts? I have some thoughts, but what are your thoughts, Fred?
Well, I've said, that the Browns have, if they have any surplus in assets, it's on offense. And OBJ would be one, or David Njoku would be one. I would not just give somebody away. People are saying, well, you just trade them to trade them. But if you can get a frontline player like that, I don't know right off the top of my head his age. But as long as he's not on the downward spiral of his career, which I assume he's not, because Belichick would be unloading him if he was. But that, to me, I would rather if you could do that with Njoku and a pick. But yeah, I would trade OBJ if I could get equal value on defense. And to me, I think Gilmore, a Pro Bowl type player. I think it was player of the year. That would be the type of player that, it makes sense, because then you can change your whole dynamic in the draft. And maybe you do look at a wide receiver, at the end of the first or at the second round or something like that, because we all know the salary situation. But I just don't want to make a trade just to dump the salary. And that brings up a point. In the pecking order, Richardson was the number 3 guy on the salary cap.
Right.
Landry and Beckham were 1 and 2. And I haven't heard anything about them. So I don't know if they've not even trying to restructure them and just saying, hey, you're getting what you're getting, and we're not going to rock the boat with you guys. But obviously they dumped Richardson for salary. So I just don't want those type of moves, just like I said, just to save money.
Right. And I'm not sure what the dead cap situation would be with Landry and Beckham. I think that they're in a much better situation to drop them after this season from a dead cap situation, from a dead cap standpoint. I'm not as crazy about Gilmore. And 2 years ago, I would have had the completely opposite opinion. But his 2020 was not all that. And it does worry me a little bit. Now, I can't say I've done the film analysis or anything like that on Gilmore, but statistically, at least 30. He was down.
Brandon says he's 30. So I'm not really interested in 30-plus cornerbacks, at this point. That's why I'm not that high on Richard Sherman, as far as I want somebody that still has those jump juice in his legs and can lock down. I don't know. Like you said, I didn't study him enough.
All right. Another question coming off the chat room comes from Ian Bitts. And he asked, do you think with most major needs addressed that the Browns could go totally off the board at 26, go pure best player available, even if it's something like offensive lineman or safety? What are your thoughts on that, Fred?
No, I don't see offensive linemen. I mean, they've put so much money into the offensive line. I mean, guys like Treader's at $11 million. You got Joel Bitonio, he's like $10 million. You got a first-round pick at left tackle in Wills. You got big-time money to Conklin and Wyatt Teller is coming up on a contract. They've got good depth right now in Forbes, Nick Harris, Chris Hubbard. I just don't think that's where you go. I still think defense is where you need more players. You need more depth. With that said, they got 6 free agents that'll probably start or be, in the front line rotation, and 3 guys coming back that missed last year. Same situation. So you could have 9 of the 11 new guys starting on defense, but they still need more depth, particularly at cornerback, particularly on the defensive line. As they stand right now, those are the 2 needs.
Mm-hmm. And, I think that the front office, the Browns front office is forward looking enough to have salary cap a factor in this, and the individual contracts a factor. So, you talk about the offensive line and, Wills isn't going anywhere. Bitonio isn't going anywhere. Teller needs to be re-signed. He needs more money. Conklin isn't going anywhere. Treader, on the other hand, might be someone who exits after this season, but I think they already got the replacement for him and Nick Harris. I'm not sure exactly how they feel about Nick Harris, but they felt confident enough to draft him last year. But I do think that they're looking forward and would make a move based on what they think 2022 needs is going to be, right?
Yeah, I think the Nick Harris is definitely in waiting, to take over for Treader. And now you got a little sticky situation because he's the president of the NFLPA. You don't want to get, accused of anything there. But, yeah, I don't think they want to mess up the line this year, and that's why no moves are made. But I still think, you can really set yourself up. You got some short-term answers maybe in Billings, Jackson, and Clowney on the defensive line. You need to get some long-term answers, to get those replacements. What made the Steelers so good, it's hard to say this, but they always have that guy in waiting that's 2 or 3 years been behind their big line guys. I don't know how many times they had linebackers over the years, Pro Bowl linebacker, he'd emerge, they'd let him go, you'd say they're done, and then a guy you never heard of stepped in, he was a Pro Bowl linebacker. They've done that, at a lot of positions, and I think that's what a Nick Harris can do. A Drew Forbes could be that backup guy at guard. You got to good teams develop those guys and don't just go for the free agents. Now you plug in the draft guys you've brought along, and so I think that's what they'll do. It's just, in the draft, I still think that they still have enough holes on defense, not holes on the front line, but backups. On offense, they've got backups at all the positions that could step in and play, besides the 11 starters returning. So on defense, they don't have that.
Right. Question from Darko in the chat room. He asked if we could see a team that needs offensive line calling the Browns during the draft about Chris Hubbard. I guess I could see that happening. What about you, Fred?
I could see that. They restructured. He had a really bloated contract, when he signed here as a free agent. And they restructured him last year, and he was still the 4th highest paid offensive lineman on the team, and he doesn't even start. He was very valuable in that role. He played tackle, he played guard, he played all over. And I think they might feel Drew Forbes can do that. Because if you remember, Forbes opted out. But before he opted out, Bill Callahan said, I think Drew Forbes or Wyatt Teller could be the right guard. I like them both. So if he saw them both as somewhat similar, you got to think Forbes has some pretty good potential. And so obviously it wasn't a good career decision for him because Teller took the job and ran with it. But with Hubbard, again, there's an asset. If you could get a nice piece on the defensive side, that's what I'm interested in right now.
Right.
A quarterback that can play or a defensive tackle that can play, those type of things. Plus,
yeah,
$4 or $5 million. That's
right. And you got to keep in mind too that the Cleveland Browns have Bill Callahan, the king of offensive line coaches, and they should be getting very good information from Callahan about who will and won't be able to step up, who he can teach and who he can mentor over the course of the next year. Hey, guys, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them into the chat room. We will jump on them like we always do. Let's go to some questions that we brought in from the forums today. The first question comes from Den, who asks us simply, do you think the Browns will actually draft a linebacker? I know there's been a lot of skepticism about the importance of linebackers in the Cleveland Browns defensive scheme. But, if you're looking at the depth chart, you got a hole at one corner perhaps, and you've got another area where you might be able to improve at linebacker.
Yeah, they signed, obviously, Anthony Walker to replace B.J. Goodson, and they re-signed Malcolm Smith. The only one they lost, pretty much was Goodson. And so, like I said, they wanted more speed there, more coverage linebacker, and that's what they got in Walker. I don't think that's their top priority. I think they're going to play a lot of 3 safeties or 3 cornerbacks, provided they get some. But one exception, there's a couple guys, particularly, I can't pronounce his whole name, but it's J.O.K. they call him,
right,
from Notre Dame. That could be the type of guy that could mirror Lamar Jackson all over the field.
Right.
As a rookie, you just say, okay, you have one assignment. You see number 8, run everywhere and don't let him cross the line of scrimmage. Make him throw a pass. And if he tries to run, tackle him. Or not just obviously against the Ravens, but you play them twice, and that's your biggest obstacle to get to the playoffs. You want to win the division. You don't want to hope to get in as a wild card. As good as the Browns season was last year, they almost didn't make it because of tiebreakers. And so you want to win the division. To win the division, I think you got to shut down Lamar Jackson. He's killing you with his legs. And they didn't have anybody, I don't think, that could run with him last year. Right. Now you have John Johnson, maybe Ronnie Harrison, maybe Jacob Phillips, but this JOK, maybe he could be the answer, or maybe Zaven Collins from Tulsa. I want somebody that can mirror that guy. And then when you play the other teams that have those guys, the Josh Allens, the Deshaun Watsons, that you could also use them in that role. Obviously, it takes the whole scheme to shut him down, but I think if one guy goes and gets the quarterback, that's his assignment, I think it can go a long way there. So that would be the exception to me. More of a hybrid safety linebacker could be the guy they go for.
Right. Well, you named the guy I was interested in, the hybrid safety linebacker, and also mentioned Josh Allen as a guy that we want to be able to run down. They may, he may not necessarily be listed as a linebacker. Maybe he's listed as a safety, but what we used to call a tweener, used to be a guy who was too big to play safety, or too slow to play safety, and not big enough to play linebacker. Nowadays, teams are actually sort of looking for some of those guys. Let's go to another question. This comes from Flaneur on the ATI forum. And he says, the latest Sporting News mock has the Cleveland Browns taking a punter in the 7th. Say it ain't so. Fred, would you take a punter with Mr. Scottish Hammer already on your team?
Yeah, I don't know. As far as he had a down season last year, I mean, there's a couple punters that I see that they have listed possibly 5th or 6th pick, a kid from Kentucky, kid from Cincinnati. I don't know I've said they're not going to use all 9 picks or because they don't have room for 9 guys, I don't think, as rookies on this team. But if you can't trade those picks for upgrading for next year or moving up in this year's draft, why not? I said last week I wouldn't mind if they felt there was a kicker that could come in and compete with Parkey. Why not, use one? They did it with Zane Gonzalez. They did it with Austin Seibert. I mean, he went in the 5th round. So if there's a kicker that, I mean, those are different breeds. You got to find one that's got some ice water in his veins. But I don't know about a punter. I mean, that to me, I don't know if you target a punter, but if you get there and you go, wow, we can't live without this guy. One of the reasons they kept Gillen, he had a great training camp, but he was an undrafted free agent. And those guys are dirt cheap, and they help balance out the roster of all the big name guys. And so, he's still on that type of a contract. So I think that they're going to give him every opportunity. They know he's got the leg. They just don't know why he slumped last year.
Right. Ian points out in the chat room that the guy from Kentucky is 28, making him the Brandon Whedon of punters. So we might not want to invest in him. Don't know if he gets stuck under a flag at some point or anything like that. Mick the dog says, I've got a better idea. Let's just not punt. I'm all for that, assuming that the offense does the right thing. Let's go to another question from the forums. This is How Dog. And he says, what are your thoughts on drafting Trevon Moehrig? I believe that's how you pronounce the name, from TCU at 26, or a small trade down with Harrison, or a small trade down, considering that Harrison is on his final contract year. So, we think we've got safety largely addressed, but there's some talented safeties who might be available at 26. Is that something you look at?
Well, with the needs they still have, if the highest corner on their board or interior lineman on their board is there, I would think he'd be higher than this Moehrig. But no, I really, in my opinion, they could go there. They could just say, the more the merrier. But they spent a 2nd round pick last year on Grant Delpit, and they made a trade for Ronnie Harrison, and they went out and spent a lot of money on John Johnson. I think that they'll address safety with one of their top 4 picks, but I don't think it'd be the number 1, because the first guy they draft really needs to come in and play immediately. And that's who they think is most ready, cornerback or a Christian Barrymore at defensive tackle, Those guys, it seems like, plug and play. By getting Clowney, you don't have to get an edge rusher and say you're starting, and especially with McKinley and Clowney now, I think they'll also address edge rusher. But again, I don't think the first pick would be where you do that. But they could just say the highest one we have is an edge rusher. We're taking him, because the money those guys are getting paid nowadays, that makes sense. You get 5 years of a 1st round pick. So I wouldn't be surprised if they took a safety, because they love safeties. But I just think if they have them close, the need is at cornerback or interior defensive lineman as we stand a week from the draft.
Sort of going in the opposite direction from that, Mick the dog said in chat that he would like to see us trade a bunch of picks and move up and get Surtain or Horn. I'm not upset about that idea at all, but I know that these front office types consider a 4th round pick to be like some giant gold nugget or diamond that they're going to use, to balance out their roster or whatever. But, given that we have 9 picks, could you see doing something like that, of saying, that's the cornerback I want, let's go get him?
Yeah, it's a matter of, their value charts and so forth. When you're at 26, to me, of the 9 picks, the ones I'm focusing on are the first 4 in the top 91. Those are all players that could step in and play. A 1st, a 2nd, and 2 thirds. Now, you have 2 4th round picks, 5th. Those guys, they got Peoples-Jones in the 6th. They got Nick Harris there. Those are value. They got Harrison Bryant in the 4th. So I know they look at them as very important. I don't know if you can even offer 3rd, 4th, and get up that high to get him. Right. You would probably, you're looking more what I'm realistically, if you're at 26 and somebody's there at 18, 19, or 20, say there's two corners that you like, Newsome or Farley, maybe then you can throw that ammo to get up. And yeah, because to me, those second, third day picks aren't as valuable as they are for this year. And that's where if you can use them to move up, I do so. But I think it would take much more to get up in the top 15 or 10 or whatever you need to do to get a Surtain. You're going to have to give up like first or second round, I would think, next year.
And
it
gets very expensive.
That's where, you might have to give next year's first and Beckham or something, plus some thirds and things like that for assets. So yeah, I like the guy. It's all how they view the value of him. If it's like this guy will put us over the top, then you do what you got to do it. But I just don't think, you're seeing teams move from 10, 11 up into the top 5. And well, it's like an arm and a leg. And so to go from 26 up to that area, I think that'd be astronomical. And I just don't think this front office, if they want to be continually building, you're not going to see them give up next year, or give up the future, for this 1 year or one player.
Everybody loves the notion of moving up until they see what the cost is. I honestly think it would probably be a higher degree of likelihood that they would move up in the second round than the first round, because it's so expensive in the first round to move up. And just the way this draft is falling. But, let's see. All right. We have a video producer who is begging for me to ask this question that comes from Volunteer Brownie in the forums. And he says, is there any interest in Trey Smith as an offensive guard if he's available in the third round? He's a monster. And if it wasn't for the blood clot issue that now appears under control, he might be drafted earlier. So, I can't claim to be a Trey Smith expert, although I love the photo. But obviously that's taking a little bit of a risk on an offensive guard in the third round. Could you see them pursuing or doing something like that, or do you think that they're be a little bit more risk averse?
Well, they have 2 picks in the third round. Again, it's how they have him evaluated. If they think this guy's a sure shot starter, I think there was a few years ago, the Cowboys, there was somebody like Zach Martin or something, questions about it. He's been a Pro Bowler, since day one. If they have him evaluated, that type of player, sure, then you got your answer for Wyatt Teller, leaving after this year. And you have him under control for 4 years. So, but I just still think that their needs are on defense, and you can use those picks to really build your depth as well as immediate help in the rotation. They need a couple corners. They need a couple defensive linemen. They need maybe a safety, an edge rusher, and all those guys, you have 4 picks in the top 100, which could all be guys that are really good players. And so I don't know how their value is, like what we said. They got Michael Dunn. They got, who's that guy, Blake, coming back. They got Forbes, in addition to Batonio and Teller. And I really think they want to keep Teller. They developed him. And so I think that could be, back to the Richardson. The only thing I could think of, they're trying to maybe extend some of these guys, but I would think you would come to an agreement before you had to release somebody. So good thought, good question. We'll know. They do their due diligence, and he said will take risk. And so I wouldn't put it past Barry to take a guard in the third round, but I just think right now they're maybe a year away from being able to really just, draft guys that they don't really care what position they're at. They're just now looking for depth everywhere.
Yeah, looking for value everywhere. We've got about 10 minutes left, so if you've got questions for the chat room, feel free to drop them in. I got a few more from the forums that we can go through as well. But a question from Brian from Facebook. He says, are you guys going to continue with the OBR Weekly or mesh it with film breakdown once the season gets underway? I would look for us to continue OBR Weekly in this format, just talking football, and for Jake to do his OBR film breakdown even more furiously during the season. But I think you'll see him after the draft start to take a look at some of the positions and some of the players involved there. So OBR Weekly will continue, and the OBR Film Breakdown series will continue. And we've got big plans for film analysis, and no one does it better than Mr. Jake Burns, in my opinion. Okay, let's go back to the forum questions. This comes from Coco McFly, and he writes in and he says, Greg Newsome seems like an ideal pick in the first round. Do you think he lasts to 26, or will the Browns need to trade up for him? Is the range more like 18 to 24? What is the likely package that could get us into the top 20 for him?
Well, he's one of the guys that, I had in mind. If you're at 26, you got the Jets, as Larry pointed out, at 23, and the Steelers at 24 that have lost some corners. And, they could look at them, although the Steelers, I think, are talking about running back. But as far as if you can get ahead of them, I'm all for it. I think cornerback right now is right there. 1A is the top need. And I thought maybe he would sign a veteran here before the draft, because there's a lengthy list of veteran cornerbacks available. I listed it today in that story, 5 steps. But there's more of them than there are defensive linemen. And so, but they might figure just as well after the draft, they can do the same thing. But I think he's going to get 1 or 2 corners at least here. And Newsome, to me, would be a great steal. I think he's 4.2 in the 40, something like that. Very smart, 4.3, very smart, played in the Big Ten. So I'd be all in on any of those type of corners. And you know how it is in the draft. There goes on runs, all of a sudden somebody takes one and boom, 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 they take 3 or 4 in a row and they're gone. So I know there's 3 considered at the top. Farley's got, some questions because of some physical. So he could drop, and that would be in the Browns' favor. And so Newsome could go ahead of Farley, in that scenario. And so, if you could move up, use some of those picks and get him, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
All right. We have a question from Rick in the chat room coming in from YouTube. And he says, maybe with the Richardson move, they're looking to make room for perhaps a trade for Gilmore. Do you think that was the rationale behind Richardson, or do you think that they're being a little bit more looking toward 2022?
Well, I don't know. I'm still scratching my head on the timing of it. It's like you said, you wait till the end of free agency to do it, and teams have spent their money. And so, but I think you have to have a pretty good feel, of the market, and that somebody else isn't going to take him, or you had to feel good enough to just say, hey, we can live without him, and we'll find somebody to replace him. But I don't think necessarily that move, maybe I'm wrong, but why do you have to cut somebody before you make a trade? You make a trade and then you cut somebody,
Right,
I think that's how it works. That's why I agreed last year with Olivier Vernon. I said all along, wait until you have his replacement before you release him. Now they ended up, they couldn't get a replacement. They couldn't get Griffin or Clowney to come in. So they redid it and kept him. I thought they'd do the same thing with Richardson, but they just let him go. So, I don't think they may make a trade, but I don't think that's the reason, because why did you have to do it before you make the trade? That's like saying, okay, I'm going to put my dog down when I don't need to, because someday I'm going to get another dog, that's not a good analogy probably, but there you go.
All right. Fair enough. With regard to the Steelers taking a running back. Ian writes, "Oh God, please let the aging team with a ton of needs take a first-round running back. I would be so happy." The only thing that could make me happier is the Cincinnati Bengals drafting a wide receiver with Penny Sewell there waiting to go. So we'll see how that goes. There's all kinds of ways that our rivals will frustrate us on draft night, I am sure. Let's go to Magna, who asked us a rather direct question. He says the front office is pretty close to the vest. What one or two things next weekend would absolutely shock you in the draft? What are we all mentally unprepared for that they could pull off?
Well, I've learned anything can happen. I mean, in 30 years or better covering the draft, they always pick somebody that I wasn't planning on. I mean, it's never who you think is the obvious choice. I mean, last year it kind of was, though, with Jedrick Wills. But, yeah, I would be shocked if they drafted a tight end the first round.
I would agree with that as well. It doesn't matter who is available. I don't think they're taking a tight end. Let's go to a question from a Wobbly. And he asked something we've sort of touched upon, that whether this team is in a position to gamble on somebody in the first round. And he mentions Caleb Farley and Jalen Phillips as gambles given their past health problems. Do you think this team is going to be looking for a sure thing, or do you think that they're possibly going to take a look at some of these guys who maybe boom or bust prospects?
Well, I think it comes down to their medicals. I think Phillips is a concussion thing, and he retired, as I understood, before in college because of that. But then he came back, and I was told he's been cleared. But that kind of situation to me is more than a Farley. Lane's reported that they like that his medicals have come back pretty clean. So if they're comfortable with him, and he's there, I wouldn't have a problem with that. And it really comes down to their evaluation of the medical. Every team does it different. Some guys take them off the board completely, and some guys, have them right up at the top. So I guess you just have to trust the Browns staff, on those particular things. But yeah, I think that Farley I would take him over Phillips just because the head, the way it is now, they get sent to the locker room with a head injury, even if they don't have a concussion, and they're going to be extra careful with that guy, and he could be done, with one or two.
Yeah. Well, supposedly the medicals down there in Miami, he passed with flying colors, but I don't know. I'm with you. A concussion makes me very, very nervous. All right. Well, I think that we have exhausted the questions that we have, and I want to once again thank everybody who's in the chat room writing to us, asking us questions, and making us laugh along the way. It's great having you there and great getting to know some of you during the course of these Tuesday shows. And so I think that we're ready to wrap this sucker up. You have anything else you want to say, Fred, or are you talked out for the day?
I'm good. I've said all I can say.
All right. That sounds good. We will be back again next week. Don't forget draft night, Thursday, Friday. We're going to be doing live streams on YouTube those 2 days. You're going to get just about every member of the OBR team showing up, talking draft, talking about the prospects, bemoaning how badly their mock drafts are doing, so on and so forth. This is a lot of fun. We're going to keep doing OBR Weekly. Thanks for coming. We'll see you all next week.
Bye, everybody.